Hello, everyone. I am going to read a couple of passages with you from a short and sweet book on forensic psychology. The book was written by David Cantor. It belongs to that Oxford series, very short introductions to various topics. Forensic psychology is at the intersection between psychology and criminology, or psychology and law. The passages that I've selected to read here in this video have relevance beyond forensic psychology. They point to a distinction, something that is at the heart of psychology. It is at the heart of how we think about people. So in general, we can say we have two different approaches when we think about people. One approach is mostly relying on types and general formulas or formulae. We rely on general formulas, maybe scientific categories. We don't care about specific individual that is in front of us. That's one approach. The other approach is exactly the opposite. It pays attention to the particular person in front of you, not about it. We don't pay attention to the type in that second approach. We don't pay attention to general regularities and correlations. Like if somebody has a drug problem, then they are inclined, or it's probable that they become abusive in the context of family relationships. No, we care about the specific facts about that one person being me, you, Jim, Julie, Amy. It's a particular person. So the second approach is about individuals. The first approach is about types and thinking with types versus thinking with individuals, so about individuals. All right, so this first passage is from page 80, which is in chapter 4. Chapter 4 is titled Psychology and Legal Proceedings. Here we read that, quote, interactions between psychology and the courts are an interplay between two very different cultures. Forensic psychologists look to develop and use standardized tests and clinical interview procedures that place individuals within a generic framework of types. In contrast, the courts seek to get to grips with a given person and the particularities of a given case. The possibilities for psychological contributions are shaped by the details of the particular legal processes, which vary across jurisdictions. So what David Cantor writes here, the way he is presenting that tension between individuals and types, he presents that to be, for the most part, the tension between the culture of psychology, the culture of forensic psychology, and then the culture of legal professionals who deal with actual people. But this tension doesn't have to be framed in terms of a tension between psychology and law. The tension is at the heart of psychology, just as it is at the heart of law and all the other humanities. There was a Danish psychologist, there is a Danish psychologist who recently wrote the book, A New Logical Foundation for Psychology. And in this book, in this very valuable contribution, he talks about the distinction between individuals and types being at the heart of all of our thinking about psychology, and the neglect of individuals in favor of types and general regularities and correlations and causation. That is a kind of blind spot of contemporary psychology. It doesn't have to be the case that psychologists, as a general rule, as a kind of a feature of their culture, it doesn't have to be that psychologists always care about types, the interview procedures, generic frameworks, and standardized tests. It doesn't have to be that way. And Jens Malmen argues in favor of keeping both of those sides, or so-called cultures, in mind. The distinction also was pointed out by Immanuel Kant, among other people. Kant talked about our thinking about individuals in terms of numerical identity. When you say that person, you point to a specific individual, as opposed to qualitative identity when you think about tall people or young people or young men or young women. All right, so let's jump ahead. The other passages I wanted to read with you are from page 96. So we're jumping 16, 17 pages in the book. We are now on chapter 5, which is titled Working with Offenders. Okay, we just want to flesh out the same distinction, fleshed out a little bit more. Here we read that for example, let's compare two different offenders. One is a married man in his mid-30s who has pleaded guilty to sexually abusing his teenage daughter since she was 4 years old. The other offender is a young man in his early 20s who was convicted of having sex with an underage boy whom he just met in a local park. Okay, so we are looking at two cases, two offenders. Both have committed serious crimes. Now, we want to bring in the tools of forensic psychology or forensic profiling. So here I'm continuing on the same page. We read that according to some standard risk assessment procedures, particularly the static 99, the young man has a much higher risk of future offending than the married man. The reason is that being married over 25 and offending within the family on a female are less predictive of future offenses than are the other factors, having had no cohabiting relationship, offending against a stranger and a male. This difference may come as some surprise, but it is based on studies using these assessments procedures and following up their predictive validity. In the next passage, we read, although such assessments have a strong logic to them, and studies show that they are broadly prognostic, they are far from being foolproof. So thinking with types is far from being foolproof, relying on statistics and regularities and how much offending, being an offender against males versus being an offender against females, how much that those things are predictive of future offenses. You might want to rely on them, but keeping in mind that these predictions are not foolproof is also equally important. Let's continue and finish the passage. One simple reason for this is that although it may be possible to characterize an individual, it is much more difficult to characterize and predict the situations in which he will find himself. Okay, so that is another advantage, another feature of thinking not with types, but with individuals. Because the moment you pay attention to the individual, you immediately pay attention to the situation in which the individual is contextualized. The situation impacts the individual, and that impact, we become more sensitive to that impact, the way an individual develops across situations. We become more likely to think about the interplay between individual and environment when we adopt the logic of individuals or the logic of numerical identity or whatever word you want to use. Okay, so that tension is not between legal process and psychology. Psychology itself has that tension within it, types versus individuals. In general, this book by David Cantor, I read it last week. I finished reading it last week. I would recommend it, not just because of its accessibility, it is easy to read, but also because it goes against some of the myths that make forensic psychology attractive and mysterious. He does a good job deflating that kind of aura of criminal psychology, forensic psychology. And the book is quite useful if you're, like me, a beginner in this field. I referred to Kant in this video. Maybe it's worth mentioning that we are starting a Kant reading group the beginning of July 3rd. If you're interested in joining, the information is available below. Otherwise, thanks again, and till next time.